They were very kind of typical immigrant in that sense, and that you have to be a doctor or a lawyer when you grow up, one of these high paying jobs. So it was tough for them to take that. And then, when I went to college, it was the first time, even though I went to college close to home, it was my first time kind of being on my own and getting to figure out what I wanted in life and what I wanted to do, and no rules, lots of freedom. And that was great.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library.
What it was like for you as a child of immigrant parents, and particularly Arab Americans. What was that like for you growing up, being in school? Did you assimilate well? Well, probably not, as you're pointing out here more immediately, that you had to tick that box, but you weren't really fully accepted. So what was that experience like for you growing up?
It was quite an interesting dichotomy. I always felt kind of torn between two cultures, because American society is a lot more liberal in certain ways. My parents, I thank them for passing on their culture to us. I'm so glad that I have that background and that I still feel so tied to my culture. But they were also very strict compared to American parents. So a lot of the time, we weren't allowed to do a lot of things. We weren't allowed to go to things on a weekday night. We weren't allowed to have boys over. We weren't allowed to do this and that. So that it felt constrictive a lot growing up, compared to what my American friends were getting to do. So there were some, um, it felt like a clash of cultures sometimes between the two. And it was kind of hard to navigate that sometimes growing up when you're also figuring out who am I and what do I want in life and this and that. Um, and it's funny because, you go out with your parents and their friends, and it's part of our culture where they fight over the bill every time. And I know some other cultures are like this too. You fight over the bill and you almost get in fisticuffs over like fighting over the bill. Who's going to pay? I learned the hard way that Americans don't operate that way. If you offer to pay, they'll say yes right away. And so I got into a situation in junior high where I went out with some girlfriends, and I offered to pay for the table because that's what I saw modeled from my parents and their friends. And they all immediately said yes. And again, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. So my parents were kind of horrified that I paid for a table of 5, 6 people at the time. And so that was a lesson that I had to learn, and that, they had to go over that with me, and that, if you offer to pay for Americans, they will say yes 100% of the time. And we don't have that much money. So, it was, learning to navigate these things. There were some funny things like that too. It wasn't all like difficulties, but it's, different sense of how the cultures operate.
Right, okay. And pretty similar to, I think, a lot of immigrant cultures, more conservative when it comes to raising their children than like,
Mhm.
the atypical American who's probably more, which is funny because there's this tussle between conservatism and liberalism here in the country, and particularly like right now when we have elections. But you get a sense that liberal parenting tends to be like more American, right? More of American thing, I think, right, than conservative parenting. Yeah, I think you'd associate being a conservative parent with somebody from a foreign country more than you would an American parent. So it's so interesting, right?
Yeah, I haven't thought of it that way, but yeah, I think lifestyle-wise, yeah, I think immigrants tend to be a little more conservative in how they raise their children for sure.
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely had mine coming from the Caribbean. We couldn't do anything. Couldn't go on dates. The boys had a little bit more freedom than the girls. We had to be home. cleaning the dishes after big family gatherings, or we had to be seen at home. We weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And it was so frustrating when we were growing up, but now we can laugh about it. But I understand why. They're protecting the girls and things like that. I get it.
Yeah.
So as you ventured out though, like career wise and becoming an adult, choosing college, like what was that like in the immigrant experience for your parents? Did you feel pressured to go a certain path, or were they supported what you felt passionate about?
Yeah, I had typical immigrant parents and that they wanted me to go to an Ivy League college and become a doctor or a lawyer. And so there was a lot of pressure on grades and doing very well in school and sort of becoming these sort of typical high paying jobs. So, but my first love before I got into coaching was film. And so when I told them I wanted to be a film director when I grow up, I was very excited about it at the age of 16 when I told them, because I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. And they were horrified. They were horrified when I told them. So I wouldn't say that there was a lot of support there with my choice. My mom in later years has become more supportive of my life choices and life decisions, but at the time it was difficult for them because they really wanted. They were very kind of typical immigrant in that sense, and that you have to be a doctor or a lawyer when you grow up, one of these high paying jobs. So it was tough for them to take that. And then, when I went to college, it was the first time, even though I went to college close to home, it was my first time kind of being on my own and getting to figure out what I wanted in life and what I wanted to do, and no rules, lots of freedom. And that was great. I would recommend for everybody to have that experience, because especially if you've grown up in a very strict environment, because when you grow up in an environment like that, it is, your parents are trying to protect you. That's great, but you don't always get to figure out who you are and what you want. You don't get to make those mistakes when you still have your parents around to help you clean up the mess. And so, um, I went to college and started to figure out who I am. And I went a little crazy. I went to some parties, and but I think it's important to have that if you've always had a very strict upbringing. It's important to get out there, and you finally start to figure out who you are in that sense of self, and you're not living for your parents anymore. Now you're living for you. What do I want? What do I want to do? And so you start asking yourself these questions and figuring out who you are, and it's a real growth period. I'd recommend it for everybody. But yeah, I appreciate all that my parents did, but yeah, it's also important to that's a part of American culture I did really start to appreciate, and that I, as a woman, have freedom to do whatever I want, and that doesn't always exist in other cultures, but you can have that empowerment to figure out who you are and to be the career that you want to be. And um I don't have to sit at home. I don't have to be a wife if I don't want to be a wife. I don't have to be a mother if I don't want to be a mother. I can be those things because I want to be, but I don't have to be.
Yes, that's good that you actually had the space, because it can become quite a clash between immigrant children and their parents.
Oh
Like
yeah.
what choices they actually end up playing out. And yes, it's an interesting
Yeah.
space for children, and my heart goes out. We have a little one here too, and so I'm just hoping that we're able to allow her some room to explore. Part of the sad part that I hear in some conversation is that I went to school abroad, and my teachers had great expectation for us. But sometimes you hear stories that in some schools the teachers don't quite expect much from the children, And so, children they're malleable, they're
Yeah.
impressionable. And so, if you expect much from them, a lot of times they will deliver. But if you expect little or nothing, then, that's when they get lost and really don't put much energy or effort into things, and you get what you're expecting from them. So
Mhm.
I appreciate the expectation that comes in the immigrant community, that you're here and we're expecting you to do well and not just kind of waste your life and our hard work and so forth.
Yeah.
But I get
That's
that
an important
conversation.
point to bring up, and that, your parents had it probably not as good as you have it. Everybody's got their different backgrounds, but they want better for you. The intention, they're well intentioned, they just want you to have a better life, and they don't want you to struggle in the same way. So I definitely, especially now as an adult, I have more of an appreciation for that.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. Me too. So I want to switch to talk now about the work that you do and how can people find you. Can you share a bit more about the grief work that you're doing and the community that you're serving? I'm thinking it's not necessarily Arab American or Palestinian Americans, but it's broader than that.
It is, yeah, it's broader than that. So I am a grief coach, grief and transformation, I like to say, because to me they go hand in hand. Um, and it's for the BIPOC community. Really anybody who needs grief and transformation coaching, I'm not going to turn them down. But it is a little more geared towards the BIPOC community, because a lot of us have these. Uh, Let me backtrack a little for people who don't know what BIPOC is. It's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Um, so it's, a lot of us have these experiences where we come from, this generational trauma. Um, that's been passed down to us, and we've experienced our own grief, and it's not necessarily just loss of people in our lives. It can be anticipatory grief of, you have a pet with cancer and you're going to lose your pet, or it's not getting certain job opportunities, and maybe race did play into that, or maybe being a woman played into that, or whatever it is. It's the current political environment. It's maybe bearing witness to genocide. There are all sorts of grief that we're dealing with and experiencing every day. And what I try to offer to my clients is that as a woman of color, I've experienced some of the things, if not a lot of the things that they are going through and experiencing. And I think we take for granted how much grief can come up with a lot of these things, because again, we're busy with life, we just keep going, and a lot of the time we don't even think about how that grief and trauma is playing into our psyche, our mental health, into our day to day, until it catches up with us at some point. Um, like it has for me in the past few years with Black Lives Matter, and the genocide that we're seeing. All of the racism I've experienced has really started to come up a lot these past few years, because I didn't even know to deal with it, back in those times. And so that's something I try to work on with clients. And it doesn't have to necessarily be about the racism we've experienced, but those nuances can kind of play into, um, the grief, and our jobs and things like that. And so it's the first part of it is taking the time to deal with that grief and using healthy coping mechanisms. And I try to emphasize that, we're not totally helpless in our grief. While there are certain things that are ongoing, like war and genocide, um, that have been happening for years, will continue to happen for years, that it is normal to have grief and frustration and anger, but we're also not totally helpless in these times. There are things we can do to take action. Um, we do have some ability to affect how we handle these things. And then there's the transformation part of it, the other side of it, where we can actually use this grief, once we're ready to, as a springboard to, do amazing things in our lives. You know, um, I'm not sure if I'm one of those people who believes that things happen for a reason. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But one thing I do know is that if we are empowered to take action, we can make things happen.
Mm.
We can transform our lives in some really substantive ways. We can transform our lives to do really good things, um, despite the grief that we've experienced. That grief can be a springboard, or it can be something um, that we continue to deal with from time to time, but we find ways to move on still. And so that's something I really work on with my clientele, um, in that take the time to experience, but also like let's set some goals and transform your life. And I think sometimes people don't necessarily understand the difference between therapy and coaching. Therapy kind of, I see them as two sides of the same mental health coin, really. Therapy looks at your background, and can diagnose you with certain medical conditions, and then comes into the present day. How can we deal with these things from your past? And while coaching can go into the past, coaching starts with the present day and deals with where are you at right now and where do you want to be? What are your goals? How do you want to change your life? And so they're two sides of the same coin. I'm very much of a strong proponent of therapy. I've been going to therapy since my 20s. If you can, if you have the funds for it, if you have the health coverage for it, definitely go to therapy, but also incorporate coaching, because that's where you can really do some meaningful things to change your future, to change the track that your life is on, in some really great, empowering ways. And so that's what coaching is about, just to do a little education about it. And, if anybody has questions, they can reach me at pact-coaching.com. That's pact-coaching.com. They can reach me on there. And I also, when people go to my website, there's a pop up that comes up right away, to download a 40-page grief toolkit. It's a little more geared towards the Palestinian community in bearing witness to genocide, but there's a lot of useful information in there for anybody who's dealing with grief. Um, any kind of grief, really, because it goes over the different types of grief, how we can deal with grief, different resources. It's chock full of all sorts of helpful information. Again, it's 40 pages long. So all they have to do is put their email in and they'll immediately get an email back with that grief toolkit. And then it puts them on my mailing list. And I email very infrequently so people will not get spammed. But if they want to learn more about coaching process and if they want to see if it's for them, they can also sign up for a free 60-minute coaching session to see if this is something that can work for them.
Yes, very good. And when you say pack, is it P-A-C-K? Pack.
No, it's PACT, P-A-C-T. Thank you
Okay.
for clarifying that. It's PACT-coaching.com.
Very good. And we'll get the details from Olivia and post in the show notes for those of you who would love to connect with her. We like to end the show, Olivia, with some sort of a humor. We've had a very deep conversation today about trauma, grief, loss, some very, heavy, heavy
Yeah.
words that we've used
Yeah.
today. Over your lifetime, can you remember any points where something just was just humorous that you kind of messed up, even though you were born and raised here? But I would call you a third culture kid or third culture person because you're born in the US, but at home you are literally raised in a different country, right? Because your
Yeah.
parents holding on to their heritage and their
Uh-huh.
roots and wanting to make sure you learn Arabic and continue making sure that you know where you're from, right? So
Yeah.
did you make any kind of faux pas, any slip up that was humorous that you'd like to leave us with today? And additionally, any general advice that you'd like to share for either children of immigrants or immigrants in general?
Well, saying it's like living in another country is very accurate. That is how it felt a lot of the time. It's like you're in your own special, like, Arab American country here. So that's a great way to describe it. I don't know if this is a faux pas, but I remember in college I was waiting tables at a restaurant. And again, because I have this sort of ethnically ambiguous look, people can't really tell where I'm from. Um, a lot of the kitchen staff there would speak Spanish to me all the time, and I didn't know what they were saying. So I didn't know how to answer them. And so they started getting more, it seemed like annoyed with me, and I didn't know where it was coming from. And one day they called me out and they were like, "You never want to speak Spanish with us. Do you think you're too good to speak Spanish with us? Do you think you're too good to that you're not one of us?" And I was like, I don't speak Spanish. I'm Palestinian. I speak Arabic." And it was so funny because it was only in that moment that they realized that I was not Hispanic, that I don't speak Spanish. And so they all started laughing. They're like, "Oh, Palestinian. Oh, great." And so after that we were friends and we got along. And um I had been spoken Spanish to so many times growing up that I used to joke that I should really learn to speak Spanish properly, so I can just go with it. And I do know some words here and there, but yeah, it's still a goal of mine to learn to speak Spanish properly, to adopt that as another language. So, so I can just go with it, or at least say, I am Palestinian, but I'll speak Spanish with you. But
Right.
that was funny because they were getting so indignant and so annoyed with me for not they thought I was, acting like I had airs on or I was better with them, and then they realized, like, no, I'm from a different culture and speak a different language. So I thought that was really funny.
Right. And I can imagine a lot of people go through that too when people are not sure which box you fit in, right?
Yeah.
Well, is there a word that you in Arabic that you can leave with us today to say? And before that, I'd like to ask any advice that you have for immigrants or children of immigrants going through their American experience, trying to balance the former culture and relationship with their parents, because it can get so hairy and
Yeah.
clashes do happen, particularly for children of immigrants when they just I was born here. My daughter tell me, but I'm born here. But I said, but honey, we have a different heritage. We have roots somewhere else. And I need
Mhm.
you to know that because I don't want you to grow up and not have an identity of who you are. It's important to know your roots because
Yeah.
that underlies who you're becoming.
It's
And
so
so important, particularly because there's so many negative messages, particularly for the people in the African diaspora in this culture. And I want her to know who she is and that she has a home in case, she's been told that she needs to leave, right? So
Mhm.
she has a birth certificate. She was born here, but you never really know sometimes we wonder like what's going to happen to
Yeah.
us immigrants who naturalize and things like that. And it can get scary for some people. So any advice for like children of immigrants or, who are clashing perhaps with their parents at home? They just want to be American children, they were born here, they speak English, but yet they have to balance the other side and being connected and enmeshed with that and the cultural expectation. Like, what advice may you have?
Yeah, that's another great question. Yeah, those clashes are going to happen. I think as far as the kids go, be patient with your parents. They want to teach you about the culture. And it is important to be connected to the culture. Try to start those conversations. It can be hard as a kid because you don't necessarily have all of that emotional intelligence yet. You don't necessarily have the language, but sometimes your parents don't either. So it kind of puts you on an even playing ground. But try to open up those conversations with your parents calmly, and say, sometimes I feel like you're too strict. Can we come to a middle ground? Or can we at least open up a conversation or a dialogue about it? As far as the parents go, understanding that while it's important to pass on that culture, maybe being so strict, isn't always the best way to go because the kids need to breathe a little. They need to experience a little bit of the culture. And as long as you're there to back them up and you've taught them good values, they're not going to go crazy. They're not going to go murder people or whatever it is that they're afraid of, it's also okay for the parents to start a dialogue. And I think communication is so important, both sides, to have that communication, to open up the dialogue. How can we come to middle ground? Because it really is necessary, especially when the cultures are so different, finding a middle ground that works for everybody. And it's kind of a mature conversation to have with a kid, but I think kids are more capable than people give them credit for. We can have these conversations. And a word I would leave the audience with, an Arabic word, is emel, which means hope.
Hmm.
I think, especially in today's day and age, especially as we're bearing witness to multiple genocides, we're in this crazy election season now here in the United States. There's a lot of division. Just remember, emel, hope. It's hard to keep your head up sometimes. It really is. And I don't blame anybody for grieving right now. I don't blame anybody for having a hard time right now. But try to have emel because it's so important right now.
Yes, very well said, Olivia. Thank you for gracing us with this beautiful conversation. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the journey, just going along with you. Thanks for reaching out. I'm so happy we had it. In addition, I would ask you to send over the names of those books for those who might be interested
Sure.
to and we'll add that all to the show notes for people how to find you on social and your official website. We'll drop that in the show notes as well. But we really appreciate this conversation. I'm a better person for having listened to it and talking with you. Thank you so much. We wish you the very best in the work that you're doing. It's so needed, not only for your community, but for a lot of other people who are dealing with
Yeah.
different types of grief and loss.
Yeah, thank you so much for creating the space. First of all, it's a great podcast. I'm glad that this exists because there are a lot of important conversations. I've listened to some of your other podcasts, and you've had a lot of really great, interesting conversations with people. So thank you for that and for creating the space and allowing me to speak about it. Just saying you're Palestinian these days, some people treat you like it's a bad word or that it's so politically charged when really it's who you are, it's your culture and your ethnicity. And so I'm glad to be able to have this opportunity to talk about it. Thank you so much, and I'll definitely send you the name of those books. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.